Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the heart of 17th century Central Africa. Picture this. The humid air is thick with the smell of smoke and palm oil.
Somewhere in a sprawling, bustling royal compound in the Indigo Kingdom, now part of modern-day Angola, you're wrapped in colourful fabric, swaddled in tradition, and surrounded by the sounds of drums, boats, and gossip. You've just been born, and while no one's quite sure of the exact year, historians still argue whether it was 1581 or 1583, they do know you'll be trouble. Queen Nzinga, a royal daughter in a land simmering with power struggles.
The Portuguese are sniffing around, enslaving people by the thousands, and your kingdom's elite are trying to play defense while still hosting dignitaries with fermented palm wine.
The court is a place of rhythm and razor-edge politics.
Your father, King Ndongo Samba, is a ruler both admired and feared, a man who respects cunning and strategy more than brute strength, which may explain why you're his favorite, even though you're not the first in line. So, before you get
comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere unexpected, tell me your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far we drift at night. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's
journey together. The court smells of palm butter and firewood. You're not old enough to talk yet, but already there's a murmur among the elders, something about the way you watch people. You don't cry much, but when you do, it's not from fear.
It's like you're issuing tiny protests. You grow up, surrounded by the rituals and customs of the Ubuntu people, who braid meaning into every gesture and pass on history not through books, but breath. The elders tell stories around firelight, not just for fun, but to train memory like a muscle. You learn quickly.
Language dances around you. Kimbanju, Portuguese, and later Latin, and Dutch too. You will become fluent in them all. Your mother possibly.
One of several wives or concubines is shrewd.
She teaches you court etiquette, but you already know how to read a room before you can even read a scroll. You're expected to be quiet and pliant like other noble girls, but instead you shadow your older brother, Mbandi, listening to military planning through half-closed doors.
He rolls his eyes at you, but you never miss a meeting daughter as a child.
You practice diplomacy by playing messenger between feuding aunties. When you're 12, you start asking your father uncomfortable questions about how treaties are made, and more importantly, why they always seem to favor the Portuguese. One night, your father brings back a group of visiting merchants and missionaries.
You stand behind a woven curtain, eavesdropping as they barter with goods and souls alike.
You hear talk of muskets, spices, and something called conversion. The Portuguese claim it's for your spiritual salvation, but you sense it's more about control. Your father doesn't trust them. Not really, and neither do you. It's around this time you discover the oddest detail about the Portuguese.
They insist on baptizing people with new names like Honor or Isabel, as if stripping someone's identity is step one to making a deal.
You file that away for later when you're a teenager. Your older brother starts growing paranoid.
He's not the diplomat you are, and he certainly lacks your finesse.
Historians still debate whether you were officially trained for leadership or simply groomed in secret, but you're definitely more prepared than most women, more than most men too. Then comes tragedy. Your father dies some whisper poison.
Others say divine punishment. Suddenly, your brother Mbandi is king. And let's just say,
he's not winning any leadership awards.
His court is chaotic, his decisions rash. You're not allowed to speak openly, but you advise him from the shadows, often calming tensions he barely understands. At least until he stops listening. You're married briefly, but records of your husband are scarce, maybe intentionally so. Some say you outwitted him in debates. Others say he just vanished, perhaps a casualty of your ambition. Either way, you're on your own now, unmarried and increasingly unafraid. Then comes the turning point, a diplomatic summons.
Your brother sends you not an elder, not a general, to speak directly with the Portuguese governor. That alone
raises eyebrows.
But what happens in that meeting?
Well, that's the story of the infamous crocodile rogue, and it's what sets you on the path to becoming a legend. But we'll get to that next.
You arrive at the Portuguese fort under a sky that feels too bright for the kind of tension in the air. The heat is thick, syrupy, clinging to your clothes, your skin, your thoughts.
A faint smell of tobacco and metal lingers as you're escorted
into the governor's chamber, a room meant to intimidate.
And it does. But not you. You're here to negotiate on behalf of your brother, King Mbandi, who, let's be honest, is not known for his people skills.
The kingdom is cornered by slavers and raiders, and the Portuguese hold the keys to trade routes and weapons.
Mbandi knows you're his only real chance at saving face. You step into the chamber.
There are rugs, polished chairs, silver goblets, and at the center of the room, a throne-like chair for the governor.
And nothing for you.
Not even a stool. The silence is sticky.
But you're not rattled. This is when you do the thing that will echo through history. You pause for just a second, then calmly, without breaking eye contact, you gesture to your servant.
He kneels behind you on all fours, and you sit on his back as if it's the most natural thing in the world. You don't blink.
You don't flinch, and the governor, surrounded by soldiers and smug advisors,
suddenly realizes he's not in charge of this room the way he thought he was. Historians still argue whether this incident really happened the way it's told. Was it a premeditated power move or a legend woven
later?
But either way, the Portuguese began to understand they weren't dealing with an ordinary diplomat.
You had steel in your words and fire under your calm exterior. That day, you negotiate like a snake in tall grass, silent, poised, and ready to strike if someone so much as breathes wrong. You speak their language, literally and politically.
You argue that the Portuguese must cease raiding your kingdom, return captives, and open trade.
And you do it all with a smile that doesn't quite reach your eyes. You also agree, at least, officially, to be baptized.
It's a political move, not a spiritual one.
They give you a new name, Dona Ana de Souza.
It sounds lovely. You never stop using your real name, of course, but you let them think they've gained something. That's your way. You bend just enough to make them overconfident, then push back when it counts. When you return home, you're greeted like a hero. Even Mbandi, who's usually too proud to acknowledge your efforts, throws a feast in your honor. But not everyone is thrilled. You've become powerful, popular, and most dangerous of all, a woman with her own mind. Some in the royal
court whisper that you're too bold, too educated, who something. Your brother listens to those voices. Soon after, you're exiled.
Or maybe you leave on your own terms. It's never quite clear.
One day, you're leading negotiations.
The next, you're packing your few belongings and disappearing into the bush. And then Mbandi starts to spiral. He rules through fear, not
respect. He orders executions. He trusts no one. Eventually, he dies. Some say suicide, others say poison, and a few murmurs suggest you might have had a hand in it. But those are just murmurs. Nothing proven, nothing said aloud. What is known? When he dies, his son, your nephew, should be next in line. But he's young,
weak.
The court is fractured, and the Portuguese are circling like Jack ALS.so. You return. You don't march in with fanfare. You glide back into the political vacuum with the elegance of someone who's already rehearsed this.
Seen in her dreams.
You begin maneuvering quietly but relentlessly.
You win over factions, play rivals against each other, and present yourself as the only person who can hold the kingdom together. But there's a problem. Traditional Ubuntu law doesn't allow female rulers in the same way it does men.
So you solve that problem the way you solve most problems, with a ceremonial workaround. You become king, not queen.
King. You even wear male regalia, refer to yourself with masculine titles, and allegedly take part in male-only rituals.
Your court gets the message. You are not bending to tradition. You're reshaping it. Some claim you went as far as dressing in full military gear, including a breastplate and sword, and leading your troops into battle personally. Others say you sat in state with leopard skins and calmly issued commands with a fan of ivory in your hand.
Either way, no one doubts who's in charge now. There's resistance, of course.
But one by one, your enemies either fall in line or fall out of favor. You secure your power not just with weapons but with words, letters, treaties, alliances.
You use every tool available, and some you invent on the spot. By now, the Portuguese are rattled.
They've seen local rulers before. But you
write in perfect Portuguese, argue like a lawyer, and occasionally show up with a cavalry. They try to undermine you with another puppet ruler. You defeat him. They try to lure you back into diplomacy.
You play along just long enough to steal their plans. At one point, they even try to assassinate you. You survive.
Of course, the woman who once sat on a human chair has now become a human storm, and we're just getting started. You are no longer the overlooked princess or the exiled sister.
You're Nzinga, sovereign of a divided, embattled kingdom. And the enemies at your door aren't just Portuguese merchants anymore.
They're soldiers, backed by gunpowder and arrogance.
And they're done pretending they want peace. So you disappear into the mountains. Not in defeat, no. Never that, but in transformation. You become the guerrilla queen, a shadow in the jungle. You wear mud-like armor, and your voice becomes
the drumbeat of resistance. This is the part of your life most people overlook: the years of dust, of blood-soaked sandals, of sleeping under stars with nothing but a knife and a plan. Historians still debate whether you lost everything in this chapter, or whether you were, in fact, building something entirely new. Your kingdom Indigo has fallen to Portuguese occupation, and your people are scattered, enslaved, demoralized.
You could have fled further, maybe lived out your days quietly in some ally's court.
But no, you double down. You establish a mobile resistance capital in Matamba, an inland region where you forge a new realm out of what remains. Matamba is rugged and thick with forest-perfect terrain for someone who knows how to move like wind. You led your troops personally, often barefoot, navigating narrow jungle trails and rivers the color of copper.
You learn every crevice of this land, every shortcut, every place where an ambush could become a legend. Your new court is different.
Gone are the golden goblets and Portuguese translators. Here, your throne might be a log, and your audience chamber a wide clearing surrounded by firelight and guards who carry spears with pride.
You sleep light, eat less, and plan always. And you fight. Portuguese forts burn behind you.
Raiding parties disappear without a trace.
You don't just hit supply lines, you erase them. You become a ghost, an omen, a whispered warning. This isn't
just warfare, it's a masterclass in improvisation.
You conscript captured Portuguese soldiers, using them to train your troops.
You trade with the Dutch, who are happy to cause their Iberian rivals some discomfort, and you shift alliances.
Like puzzle pieces every week. A new map, one particularly clever trick. You start hiding messages inside cassava baskets.
Your couriers look like humble food vendors, but inside,
orders, maps, negotiations.
Who's going to inspect someone carrying lunch?
And then there's your most famous military maneuver crossing. Crocodile-infested rivers at night with your troops using logs and silence. Portuguese reports complain of entire garrisons vanishing into the trees after torchlight flickered on the water. It's said you could predict the moon's reflection on a stream with enough accuracy to time a sneak attack. Not bad for someone who once wasn't even allowed to inherit the throne. But your resistance isn't just physical. You fight spiritually. 2. You elevate Mbundu priests, host rituals to rally morale, and blend Christian symbols with traditional beliefs, always in your favor, of course. You don't dismiss faith.
You wield it, and you never stop talking. Your letters during this period are both poetic and cutting.
One particularly delicious phrase you write to a Portuguese governor. You may have castles, but I have the hearts of the people.
The ink might as well have been acid. You also begin to gather outcasts, enslaved people who escape, women rejected by other tribes, warriors from faraway lands seeking purpose.
You make room for them.
Some become spies, some become leaders, all
become loyal. Still, the pressure mounts. Resources are scarce. Trust is harder to come by. And then, of course, there are the whispers that you've become too militant, too strange to.
Masculine, which brings us to one of the strangest episodes of your reign. Allegedly, you take a harem, not of men you love, but of warriors handsome, fit, loyal fighters whom you refer to as your husbands. You're said to dress them identically,
feed them from the same bowl, and rotate them nightly.
Those who disappoint
vanish. Historians still argue whether this tale is truth or European invention.
Some say it's slander, designed to make you seem unhinged. Others suggest it was real, but symbolic, a way to claim dominance in a male-dominated landscape. You never confirm or deny it.
You just smirk when asked. What is certain is this: you don't play by the rules, especially not the ones men wrote. Why?
The end of this era. You're no longer just the queen of a kingdom, you're the nucleus of a rebellion.
The center of a new kind of state.
One built not from stone, but from motion, not from obedience, but from sheer force of will. And when the Portuguese send new generals, new missionaries, new spies, you welcome them, then outlast them. You've been called many things by now, queen. Rebel, tyrant, savior.
But sister is where things get complicated. Back in the days when your brother Mbandi still ruled, you had family, real family.
Some loved you, some feared you, and some, well, some were dangerous in that quiet, smiling way. After Mpandi's death, The lines of loyalty got blurry fast.
But one thing is clear, your sisters, especially Kifunji and Bukambo, aren't easy to manage.
And let's be honest, you don't really try to. Your court now runs on cunning, not sentiment.
There's no room for soft-hearted nostalgia when spies are listening and alliances fray faster than old rope. Still, you make strategic use of blood to your eyes.
One of your sisters becomes a priestess.
Another marries a regional chief whose soldiers.
You need. Every kinship becomes currency, but then comes the coronation moment. You're king now officially, emphatically, defiantly. The ceremony is everything and nothing like tradition. Normally, a king is crowned standing between two male elders.
But there's no template for you.
So you improvise. They say you held the sacred regalia yourself, drums pounding, incense burning, and performed both roles. You chanted and were chanted to. 1 minute you were the ruler, the next the audience. You made the moment yours. Still,
people talk. The Mbundu are not monolithic, and some noble families grumble.
You're a woman acting like a man, walking the palace with a sword, drinking from the royal calabash. And worse, you're good at it.
That's the part they really can't.
Stand.to balance things. You lean into ritual.
You host elaborate ceremonies. You give charms, sponsor sacrifices, even stage mock battles in your own honor. At one point, you declare a full moon feast where only women may speak. It drives your male generals mad and ensures the loyalty
of every widow, daughter, and matriarch within 100 miles. But while you're finessing internal politics, external threats loom.
A puppet claimant to the throne, possibly backed by the Portuguese, springs up from the west.
He has noble blood and some dubious paperwork. And just like that, you've got a rival, King.So. You do what you always do. You don't react. You respond. You invite him to parley.
You smile, offer wine, and promise nothing.
And while he's busy getting flattered, your scouts are mapping his supply lines.
A few weeks later, his camp goes up in flames, and he's never heard from again.
Of course, his supporters aren't thrilled.
Which means more fires to put out, some with speeches, some with sharp objects. One fire you can't put out, though, is the increasing influence of Catholic missionaries.
The Portuguese send wave after wave priests with crosses and agendas.
And they're slippery, unlike soldiers. They come bearing gifts.
Books, candles, whispered AB Solutions.So. You take the high road. You host the priests in your court.
You flatter them. Let them preach. You even hold a few public baptisms.
You
may or may not attend them, depending on your mood. Your court becomes a place of duality, where Christian hymns echo in the morning, and Mbundu spirit dances swirl by night. One particularly shrewd move. You have 2 of your sisters publicly convert, then send them as emissaries to a Portuguese
fort.
They return weeks later with trade goods, maps, and more than a few secrets.
The Portuguese still don't realize the sermons they delivered were being translated and edited mid-sentence by your loyal scribes. You've mastered the art of letting people think they're winning, but behind the veils and ceremonies, you're
deeply strategic. You begin training a new generation, not just warriors, but negotiators, multilingual scribes, mapmakers.
You're building something that can survive without you, and still, people question your choices. There's the story of the rival chieftain who offered you peace, only to vanish mysteriously after dinner.
And the whispers about how your cook's recipes change depending on who's visiting.
Some of it's true, some of it's paranoia.
You don't bother correcting either. One night, during a full moon celebration, your most senior general leans
close and asks, half joking, "How long do you think you'll keep this up?"
You sip your wine slowly, then say, "Until they forget I was never meant to." And maybe that's the point.
You're not trying to restore the old order. You're inventing something entirely new. A kingdom that's portable. A power that moves with you.
A monarchy with no fixed gender. No fixed capital, only fixed resolve. It's around this time that you send an invitation to the Dutch.
After, or if the Portuguese won't play fair, maybe their European rivals will. But we'll get to that game of risky alliances soon enough. You hear the Dutch before you see them. Their ships come grinding up the river, fat with cannons and creaking with ambition.
You stand on a bluff with your arms crossed, watching these strange red-bearded men who speak like they're constantly
chewing pebbles. Their sails snap like thunder. Their boots leave patterns in your soil, and their offers come wrapped in flattery and gunpowder. The Dutch want what all Europeans in Africa seem to want: leverage, ports, and whatever resources they can fit into barrels and send back home. But unlike the Portuguese, They don't come armed with missionaries or divine mandates. No, they come with ledgers. Traders first, colonizers second. They're pragmatic, and that's precisely why you can use them. So you meet them, these merchants, of muskets and molasses.
You speak to their interpreters, let your voice glide like river water, and offer them something no one else can. Strategic partnership against the Portuguese. They lean in.
They listen, and you negotiate. It's here, in
these war-torn jungles, that you perform some of your most brilliant balancing acts. You pit European powers against each other like jealous cousins.
You offer trade routes, intelligence, ivory. In return, you ask for weapons, not just guns, but gunmen, cannons, Dutch military advisors.
You don't want trinkets, you want results, and
for a time you get them. Dutch muskets start appearing in your ranks.
Portuguese forts begin to feel a little less invincible.
The balance of power shifts ever so slightly. You never fully trust the Dutch, but then again, you don't fully trust anyone. That's your strength. Your mobile court becomes even more sophisticated.
At this point, you're ruling not just through charisma and military might, but through what we'd now call intelligence operations.
You've got spies posing as traders, informants buried deep in Portuguese outposts, and scribes who can forge letters so perfectly that even the Portuguese governor once replied to one of your own fake missives agreeing to terms you never
actually proposed. Historians still debate whether you orchestrated one particularly wild stunt, planting false intelligence about a planned ambush, leading the Portuguese to attack an empty village while your army doubled back and sacked their
supply lines. If you didn't do it, someone trained by you did. There's even a fringe theory unproven, but persistent, that you once disguised yourself as a Dutch translator and sat in on your own diplomatic negotiations just to make sure the men in the room didn't screw it up. The fact that it's even plausible tells you something, but your growing power brings fresh challenges. Your territory stretches, your alliances grow brittle.
Managing the Dutch is like holding a knife by the blade they're useful, but always threatening to cut you.
They trade you muskets one day and cut back supplies the next, depending on how their fortunes shift in Europe. Then comes the diplomatic trap. The Portuguese, ever conniving, start floating the idea of peace.
Not surrender, just peace. They send messages full of soft words and hollow flattery. They know they can't
beat you on the battlefield, so they try the other weapon in their arsenal, diplomacy with strings attached. They invite you to talks.
You accept, but on your terms.
The setting?
Neutral.
The tone? Civil. The stakes?
Everything. You walk into those meetings not as a supplicant, but as a monarch.
The Portuguese offer pardons, titles, even marriage alliances.
They speak of integration,
of shared futures and gentle transitions. You counter with demands, recognition of your rule, the return of your people, the withdrawal of troops. Your tone is honeyed, but your message is still a T1 point. When they suggest that you adopt less aggressive language in your treaties, you raise an eyebrow and say, "Would you prefer I draw you a map to surrender?"
They laugh nervously, but you don't. You begin writing more letters, long, detailed, persuasive works of political theatre.
One Portuguese diplomat writes home complaining that you command the pen like a general commands a field. You take that as a compliment. Meanwhile, your court shifts again. You begin training young women in diplomacy. Your inner circle is now a mosaic of talent former slaves, merchants, generals, translators, priests, all loyal, all capable,
all dangerous. If cross-darting one memorable story may be true, maybe embroidered, you reward a servant who uncovers a Portuguese assassination plot by giving her a golden anklet and a position in your spy network.
She
becomes known only as the Shadow. That's your court now, regal by day, ruthless by moonlight. But the jungle takes its toll. Even legends get tired.
You're not young anymore. Your back aches.
Your knees protest during long marches.
And yet you carry on.
Because you must.
Because if you stop, the entire machine might fall apart. One rainy night, as you camp under a thatched roof, lightning flashes and you mutter. Even the sky is impatient. A soldier nearby laughs nervously and asks what you mean.
You smile.
Slow and sharp. The gods are waiting to see who blinks first. You don't, and next, you'll marry your army, sort of. But we'll talk about that peculiar chapter soon.
Your court no longer sits still.
It walks, it sails, it crouches in thickets. It's a kingdom with calluses, a state that wears sandals, not crowns. You've turned mobility into strategy, making your entire political infrastructure portable, like An ant colony with royal banners. Palaces made of woven reeds pop up near rivers. Thrones are logs dragged between meetings.
Your council carries their maps on the inside of their cloaks. It's not just survival.
It's deliberate.
You've decided that the future of your people is not rooted in stone walls or a fixed capital, but in the ability to vanish and reappear, to adapt faster than the Portuguese can reload their muskets. You've also made your people part of the
Court, not just nobles, but farmers, craftsmen, runaway slaves, former prisoners.
Your kingdom has no moat, but it has layers.
Outer rings of warriors, middle circles of aides and scouts, an inner group that is part family, part advisory cabinet, part bodyguard unit, most of them handpicked by you, and many of them women. One of your favorite spies, a woman named Lunda, travels as a wandering herbalist. She treats wounds, listens
to gossip, then disappears into the trees to deliver her reports. You once told her, if people want to underestimate you, let them.
Then charge double. She did, and came back with the Portuguese camp's latrine schedules and their wine list. You've created something rare, a court with flexibility, humour, and teeth, but even empires on the go need resources. And yours comes from savvy trade deals, and even severe propaganda. Take your alliance with the Imbangala warriors brutal. Roaming mercenaries feared even by the Portuguese. These weren't easy allies.
They practiced ritual cannibalism and forced initiation rites that made your hair stand on end. But they were strong, mobile, and loyal once paid. Historians still debate whether you adopted their customs, reined them in, or simply tolerated their chaos long enough to point them at the right targets.
One thing's for sure, they made your enemies nervous. Your diplomacy, meanwhile, becomes a thing of art.
You draft treaties in multiple languages, Portuguese for your enemies, Kimbandu for your people, and sometimes Latin, just to show off.
Each version contains subtle differences. One treaty has you offering tribute.
Another has you accepting tribute.
Depends on who's reading. The Dutch are still sending the occasional shipment of arms and gunpowder, and you cleverly lose a few crates to rogue smugglers who just happen to be friends of yours. Every powder horn is accounted for, just not always by you. But the real genius of your roving court is how it reshapes the idea of legitimacy. You don't wait to be crowned again, you carry the crown with you.
At one stop, a group of elders tries to challenge your right to rule.
You
respond by hosting a debate at the village square.
3 hours, 4 arguments, and 1 roasted goat later, the elders are not only convinced, they leave as emissaries to other holdouts. You win them not with swords, but with sheer rhetorical gravity. This is where your style earns its name. The
Queen of Words and Wits. You start training orators,
young women especially. You teach them how to pace a story, when to pause, how to make a treaty sound like a song, and an insult sound like praise. You create something close to a school, not in buildings, but in conversation, around fires, near rivers, in moments between survival and ceremony. You teach them how to make words do what armies sometimes can't. One of your aides tells a foreign visitor, Queen Nzinga has more generals in her mouth than on her battlefield. You hear about this and laugh until your ribs hurt. Then you make the aide repeat it during a festival speech. But not everything is witty banter. There are losses. A smallpox outbreak sweeps through part of your encampment.
You walk among the sick, offering herbs, prayers, and once, a story that seems to ease a child's breathing for the night. You lose people.
You lose friends. The trees seem quieter after that. Yet you don't stop. You hold a mourning ceremony beneath a canopy of woven leaves.
You speak not as queen or general, but as a woman who has outlived too many things.
Even rivers dry, you whisper.
But they return when the rain remembers. The court doesn't move for 2 days. That's how they know it mattered. When
it resumes, the entire convoy feels more focused, as if your grief has been translated into fuel. Somewhere in the midst of all this, you adopt a child not your own by blood, but someone orphaned by the war. You name him Kambu. He becomes a quiet shadow at your side, always watching, rarely speaking. Years later, people will wonder if he became your heir. But for now, he's just a child you refuse to abandon. And that matters. Your court shifts westward.
As Portuguese pressure increases,
you split your forces, establish decoys, and leave behind false maps.
One map supposedly leads to your gold stores. It actually loops in a circle. 3 Portuguese officers follow it for days before realizing
they've been circling a mango tree. You don't hear about it until months later. You laugh so hard, you nearly fall off your seat, and just like that, Your roving kingdom rolls on part ghost, part dream, part hurricane still to come. The rumors of your husbands, the diplomatic stunts that'll leave governors reeling, and a few well-timed miracles. But that, dear listener, is for next time. By now, your legend is not just something whispered around campfires, it's something governors, priests, and generals debate in full daylight, hands trembling just a little when your name comes up. Queen Nzinga, a queen, a king, a walking contradiction.
And as your enemies grow more confused, the stories around you only multiply. Some say you talk to spirits. Others claim your reflection disappears from rivers. A few even insist you age backward. You do nothing to dispel these myths.
Why would you? Fear is a strategic resource more renewable than gold, and far more portable, but fear isn't enough to hold a kingdom together. You've reached the part of leadership that's the most difficult, maintenance. Warfare is flashy, victory speeches are easy, but now, in the rainy hush of your fort in Matamba, you face harder choices. Your army's strong, yes, but it's
Hungry.
Your people are loyal, but tired.
There's growing tension between your spiritual advisors and your European allies.
And then there are the whispers again about sacrifice. Your people have always walked the line between tradition and pragmatism, and among those traditions is the belief that some situations require more than offerings of fruit or feathers. Some require life. The Mbundu practice of human sacrifice wasn't widespread, but it existed, and in times of great need, elders might suggest it. Now, some advisors, desperate to restore divine favor, quietly propose the unthinkable. Captives, enemies,
even volunteers, historians still argue whether you agreed. Some claim you ordered a handful of prisoners offered to the ancestral spirits before a decisive battle. Others say you allowed the ritual, but did not participate. A few say it never happened at all, that it was Portuguese propaganda, meant to discredit you as barbaric, but the truth.
You never confirm or deny. You simply say, a kingdom does what it must.
You do sacrifice other things though.
Softness, privacy,
trust. You begin waking in the middle of the night to revise plans, whispering commands to aides who now carry knives in their boots. You start sleeping with a dagger beneath your mat,
and dream of rivers clogged with armor. One morning, a trusted advisor disappears. No sign of violence, no note, just gone. You sit by the fire that evening, sipping sour palm wine, and say nothing.
You just stare into the flames like you're trying to remember what still burns. But not all is bleak. You begin a new tradition, one of your own making. Every month, you gather your top generals, not for war councils, but for storytelling, around a large fire. They take turns recounting old victories, failed missions, even personal memories. At first, it's awkward, then healing. You tell the story of your first solo negotiation, how you wore mismatched sandals to confuse the ambassador.
Your generals laugh, even the gruff ones.
One says, "We thought you were just intimidating. Now we know you're also
petty."
You raise a cup to that dot in a moment of unusual softness. You send word to the Portuguese, a proposal,
a truce, with terms generous enough to tempt, but not quite enough to trust. They nibble at the bait, unsure if it's coated in poison. Meanwhile,
your image is changing strategically. You begin wearing more ornate clothes again, even in the jungle. Gold-threaded capes, beaded necklaces, elaborate hairstyles sculpted by your inner circle.
You want the world to remember, you're not just a commander, you're royalty. If people see you shining, they'll believe the kingdom is shining too, and it works. Your people begin returning, former nobles, villagers displaced by conflict, even traders who once fled now ask permission to rejoin your domain.
You welcome them with measured grace.
Sometimes a feast, sometimes a test, always a message. This court bends for no one, but it remembers its own. Then, another fringe story enters circulation.
That you've begun consulting with a sacred python said to carry ancestral wisdom.
It sleeps near your throne, and when it curls in one direction, it means war.
The other, peace. This is almost certainly untrue. You don't even like steaks.
But your aides lean into it.
One builds a coiled sculpture and leaves it behind your council bench during meetings. You don't stop them. And then there's the darkest rumor of all, that in moments of extreme duress, you speak to the spirits of your enemies,
not to curse them,
but to listen, to understand how they failed, and how you might avoid the same end. One
Portuguese missionary writes that you once entered a trance-like state after reading a governor's letter, then dictated a reply so devastating that he resigned the next month. Another priest claims you spoke Latin in your sleep. A third simply, calls you the woman who ruins men, but you don't ruin. You rebuild, and sometimes that means tearing down first. Sacrifice, as you've learned, isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's waking up each morning and choosing not to give in. It's watching your people suffer and holding the pain quietly,
so they don't crumble.
It's writing letters in candlelight, knowing most of them will go unread, and still, you led, because this isn't about revenge, or glory, or even legacy. It's about making sure that no one, not the Portuguese, not rival tribes, not even time itself can erase you, and that, listener, is a power no sacrifice can match. There's a certain irony in how your rebellion begins to feel like an empire. You've spent years running from crowns, thrones, treaties, and now you wear them all at once.
You are no longer just the monarch of Indigo.
You're the architect of something slipperier, an alliance, a resistance, a mobile kingdom stitched together by wit, trade routes, and shared grudges, and it's working. Your rival kings are weakening. The Portuguese can't keep a foothold. Even nature seems to favor you. Crops flourish in the Matamba lowlands. Rain falls in the right seasons. Soldiers sing on patrol. For a moment, just a moment, you allow yourself to think, we might actually win this. But here's the twist: the more powerful you become, the more you have to juggle. Now you're not just managing warriors, you're managing expectations. Village chiefs expect gifts. Your own generals expect promotions. The Dutch expect loyalty. And the Portuguese, they expect you to fall. Let's start with the Dutch dot in the 1640s. They make their big move.
With support from their West India Company, Dutch forces seized Luanda from the Portuguese.
Suddenly, the colony you fought so hard to destabilize is under new management. Protestant management. You see opportunity. The Dutch may not be saints, but they don't have the same lust for conversion. They want pepper, ivory, slaves, yes, but also influence.
And they're more open to strange alliances. So you
send them a formal embassy.
Historians still argue whether you rode to the Dutch fort in ceremonial armor or arrived in a silk dress and war paint.
Some say both. What's agreed upon is this: the Dutch listen. They recognize your titles. They
allow you to trade under your own banner, and they agree at least on paper to a military partnership against the Portuguese. You toast to that with a Dutch captain whose beard smells faintly of cloves and disappointment. The dealer's a gamble, of course.
Dutch ambitions aren't your own,
but it gives you leverage, and that's enough. You return to your court with a renewed energy. You commission a new series of royal drums, each carved with symbols of your victories: the eagle for cunning, the firefly for persistence, and the crocodile for reasons no one's quite sure about. But that's part of the
charm. And you start using the title, Queen of Matamba and the Southern Rivers, not just to sound fancy, but because rivers, to your people, are sacred paths between worlds.
Naming yourself their ruler is more than poetic.
It's protective magic. Still, not everything flows as smoothly as the Kwanzaa River. The Portuguese
haven't given up.
They regroup inland, retaking Luanda a few years later.
Suddenly, your Dutch alliance becomes a liability.
Traders flee. Outposts fall.
You lose 3 forts in a single month, but you don't panic.
You adapt. Your strategy shifts from occupation to ambush.
You start training smaller, more agile units.
Your generals develop new code songs melodies whistled through the trees that signal retreat, advance, or surrender. Your war becomes music. And then there's your image. You evolve again. In public. You present yourself now more often in traditional and bundu dress barefoot, adorned in layered beads, flanked by warrior women.
You laugh more openly. You cry during funerals.
Your people begin to see you not just as a ruler, but as a symbol. Not perfect, not immortal, but real.
And somehow, that makes them trust you more. Tonight, you still hold private councils.
But increasingly, these include elders and women of the court.
You listen to herbalists, midwives,
weavers, not just for their loyalty, but for their perspective. One tells you, a tree that grows tall must not forget its roots. Another warns, cryptically, the spider that spins in all directions loses the center.
You take their words seriously.
Begin focusing more on consolidation, less expansion, more healing. You declare a period of rest, not peace, exactly, but stillness. Trade resumes.
Children who've only known war learn how to dance without fear
of drums, and yet you know this can't last forever, because one night, deep in your private chamber, a message arrives, smuggled in under the heel of a runaway slave. It's from Luanda. The Portuguese wanted to talk, not war, not surrender. Talk, You sit in silence after reading it.
The candles around you flicker.
Outside, the jungle hisses with life, and somewhere, far away, you hear the haunting echo of a hyena laughing, maybe mocking. It's the moment you've waited for, and yet, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like the beginning of something even harder. Diplomacy, and diplomacy, as you've
learned, is just war with better stationery. You begin the next chapter not with a battle cry, but with a letter, a long, meticulously crafted letter, written by candlelight and dictated in your calmest tone.
No threats, no insults, just a subtle reminder of everything you've survived. It
opens like this. To the most esteemed governor of Angola. You don't call him enemy. You don't even call him friend. You call him esteemed, because sometimes the sharpest sword is a compliment dipped in acid. You propose negotiations, not because you've lost,
but because, as you say in the letter, two flames burning on the same branch must learn to share the wind. They write back surprisingly fast. They propose a meeting
on neutral ground, with full diplomatic ritual. You smile.
Then you frown, because rituals with the Portuguese always come with chairs. You remember your first audience decades ago, when they refused to offer you a proper seat, when they expected you to kneel, when you used one of your retainers as a human stool, just to meet them eye to eye.
You haven't forgotten. So now, for this new meeting, you bring your own chair. Actually, you bring 3 hand-carved, lacquered, inlaid with copper filigree. One for you,
one for your translator, one empty, placed deliberately across from you.
When the governor arrives and asks who it's for, you say, "That's for the dignity that was once missing." He doesn't laugh, but his aide does.
Nervously, the negotiations are slow, always are. The Portuguese drag their heels. They demand tribute.
You counter with trade. They want missionaries. You want military withdrawal. They want obedience.
You offer respect, back and forth.
Like a dance where everyone's counting steps.
Too loudly, historians still argue whether this first round of talks accomplished anything concrete. Some say it was a stall tactic.
Others believe it opened real doors.
But the tone changes, and that, to you, is everything. Meanwhile, your kingdom continues evolving. You appoint new officials, not just warriors now, but scholars, interpreters, diplomats,
women and men who've learned to wield words like spears.
You call them your echoes. They go where you can't.
They speak with your cadence. They plant ideas like seeds, and then you do something bold. You write to the Pope. Yes,
that Pope, the one in Rome. The letter is ceremonial, yes, but sincere. You confirm your Catholic faith.
You reiterate your desire for peace.
And you remind him, oh, so gently, that your baptismal name, Anna, was not given lightly. A response comes months later. But it comes.
A short blessing.
A few empty platitudes.
But it's a signal.
The Portuguese can't treat you like a heretic anymore.
Not when the Vatican has acknowledged your pen. Still, religion remains complicated. You attend Mass. Yes, but privately. You observe Mbunde ceremonies too. You pour wine for ancestors and say prayers in Latin. Your court becomes a curious blend of incense, drums, rosaries, and bone charms. You don't call it fusion. You call it survival. Your critics, of course, mutter.
They say you're playing. Both sides.
That you believe nothing. But those critics never ruled a kingdom on fire. Your people believe you.
And that's enough. In the countryside, your legend becomes almost ridiculous.
Children claim you ride a leopard.
Elders swear your shadow moves independently. Traders say your name can calm storms.
You let the stories grow.
What is power, if not belief shaped into rumor? And through it all, you keep writing. More letters.
More petitions. More counter-offers. Each one a little firmer than the last.
You begin to see the shifts. Portuguese commanders backing down. Governor stepping aside. New envoys arriving with softer voices and rounder faces. You're not naive.
You know it's not love, it's exhaustion. But exhaustion is leverage too. Then, one afternoon, you make a decision that shocks your court. You announce your intention to build not a new fort, but a new capital. A seat of diplomacy, not war. A permanent home for peace, should it ever show up on time. The elders murmur.
Why now? They ask. The fighting isn't done. You nod, which is why we must build like it is. So you choose a place near a river bend, easy to defend, easy to reach.
You order roads carved, walls molded from clay and ironstone, market spaces wide enough for foreign caravans.
You design a palace without thrones, only long benches.
A signal.
No one rules alone anymore. The palace becomes a symbol, even unfinished, and it's from there that you send your next letter. The most audacious yet, you ask not demand that the Portuguese recognize your sovereignty. Not just your person, but your office. That the crown of Indigo is legitimate and hereditary and equal in dignity to theirs. They don't laugh this time. They blink, they stall. But the letter makes its rounds, and people begin to whisper. Queen Nzinga doesn't just fight. She governs, which, in the long run, might be even more frightening, because a warlord can be killed. A queen can be replaced, but an idea, that takes root. That spreads, and as the dry season settles over your kingdom, and the wind shifts west, you sit by a window in your unfinished palace, listening to distant drums. They're not war drums, they're harvest drums, and you allow yourself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, the next sound will be silence. You wake before dawn, again. Not because of alarms your kingdom doesn't use those, but because your sleep is a shallow thing these days. There's always something. The hum of distant drums, the rustle of messages arriving in the dark, the memory of one-to-many double crosses. This morning, it's the rustle. A courier stands quietly outside your chamber with a bundle of folded parchment tied in ribbon. You nod. Another letter from the Portuguese. Another round of diplomatic origami. You untie the ribbon. Ink smudges your fingers. And your mood, they're requesting clarification again. You read the first paragraph aloud in a Merc accent, earning a chuckle from your ladies in waiting. One of them mimics your voice back at you, pretending to draft a reply to His Excellency, Governor of ever-shifting opinions. You laugh harder than you have in days, but even while laughing, you're already crafting the real response in your mind, because by now, your diplomacy is a kind of choreography. Every letter, every phrase, every tiny pause is calculated. You've learned their verbal dance. You can predict the next beat, and when necessary, you can disrupt it just enough to keep them guessing. Over the years, you've composed enough official correspondence to fill a small library. Some are dictated, others you write by hand. In every one, your style is unmistakable gracious, but firm, clever without mockery. Fluent in both your native Kimbantu and flawless Portuguese, your letters rarely include direct threats, but they shimmer with implication. A single metaphor, say, about a snake shedding its skin can imply a revolution. A compliment, say, about the steadfastness of a Portuguese officer might actually mean, you're in the way. 1. Governor writes back, Your Majesty's pen is sharper than her sword. You have that one framed. Still, as you write, you're not doing it for poetry. You're playing the long game. You're reshaping the narrative. You want history there. History to include your voice. To acknowledge you not just as a queen, but as a state. Historians still argue how many of your letters survive in the archives today. Some say dozens. Others suspect many were lost on purpose. What's certain is this. The ones that remain are dazzling. Take the treaty negotiations. The Portuguese want concessions. You offer partnership. They want hostages. You offer nephews well-trained, well-dressed, well-spoken nephews, who will smile just enough to pass, but never forget who sent them. You draw lines. You erase them. You draw new ones. One day, you include an entire paragraph in Latin. Just to see if they catch it. They do. Their reply has a Latin blessing at the end. You are not impressed, but you're amused. Meanwhile, you dispatch envoys of your own, not just to the Portuguese, but to neighboring African polities. You send cloth and pepper and rumors. You remind them that alliances are written in salt as much as ink, and you get creative. You start embedding secret codes in your embroidery colors and patterns that signal different things. A sash might mean safe passage. A set of earrings might signal stall. Your aides know how to read it. Some Portuguese commanders don't even know it exists. You also weaponize gifts. You send the Portuguese ornate ivory carvings, knowing they'll be too enchanted to notice the allegorical message. A crocodile chasing a hunter. A woman standing calmly atop a lion. They display them proudly in their homes, unaware they're basically hosting your propaganda. And while all this is happening, this great bureaucratic ballet, you still rule. You still host audiences, still settle land disputes, still inspect crops, still attend weddings and funerals. You keep your kingdom running not like a machine, but like a living thing, messy, noisy, and always needing food. There's a moment one afternoon, during a quiet audience, when a boy approaches the throne barefoot and shy. He's brought you a gift, a crude model of a ship carved from soapstone. For the Queen, he says, to remind her the Portuguese float. But we don't sink. You give him a basket of figs. You also keep the carving on your desk. It becomes your new paperweight. And yet, you're always aware of time. Your hair is greying, your joints ache. Your counselors whisper a little louder now, just in case.
But your mind, still sharp.
Sharp enough to slice the air if needed, and
Here's the thing. While your enemies once tried to kill you with swords, now they try to kill you with terms. Annexation, tributary, protectorate. You strike through those words with red ink. One letter comes with a treaty proposal so convoluted it might as well be a crossword puzzle. You rewrite it in plainer language and send it back.
no commentary, just edits. Like a teacher grading a lazy essay. When they complain, you shrug. Better clarity makes for better peace. Eventually, they stop arguing about if they should respect your rule.
Now they only argue about how much that, for you, is victory, because for all the war fronts you've commanded, it's this.
Tedious, daily work of writing, translating, responding that truly cements your legacy. Not as a fluke queen, not as a rebellious footnote, but as a ruler in full. One who could fight with armies, and win with paper. Your ink-stained fingers are never still for long, but neither is your court. The years have made you nimble, not just in thought, but in maneuvering a world that changes with every sunrise.
Your court, once rooted in Ndongo's ancestral lands,
Is now a constellation of moving camps, wooden platforms, and clever tents, part parade, part war council, part royal family reunion. And speaking of family,
it's complicated. You glance across the firelight one evening to where your younger
sister, Kifunji, sits weaving her hair with the kind of focus you used to envy.
There were times when you two didn't speak for months once, nearly a year. Old wounds linger. She resented your rise, the rumors, the rivalry.
And yes, at one point, she sided with the Portuguese, however briefly, but lately, things have softened.
The war has dragged on. Your enemies multiply, and nothing bonds estranged siblings quite like watching the Dutch mess up a secret deal with both of you. Still, there's no such thing as a family in royal politics. You've learned that.
The hard way. Take your brother's son, Ndongo and Matamba, your nephew. Bright, handsome, persuasive. Too persuasive, maybe. You adopt him formally. A gesture full of both affection and calculation. A future heir, some whisper. Others murmur. A potential traitor. Historians still argue whether your adoption of Matamba was a sign of trust or a strategic trap. Some say,
You loved him like your own son. Others suggest you kept him close precisely because you feared what he might become. In truth, probably both. Your court begins to buzz with succession rumors.
You are aging, yes, but not slowing.
Still, people count birthdays like they count battle scars. You hear whispers around the cookfires, where servants murmur prayers, some for your health, others for clarity about what happens next. One night, a loyal advisor leans in and says,
Your Majesty, you must name someone. You stir your porridge slowly. I have, you reply, but they haven't noticed yet. You make careful overtures to local chieftains, rebalancing alliances so that no single faction in court becomes too powerful. One group favors your nephew,
another secretly supports your sister.
You maintain the illusion that any of them might
win your favor, just long enough to keep them behaving. Meanwhile, you continue drafting alliances on paper while threading them through ceremonies. A cousin marries a provincial chief. A loyal bodyguard's daughter is promised to a neighboring noble's son.
You oversee every detail not because you love weddings, but because each one is a treaty disguised in lace and laughter. Outside the tent, the war continues in slow, choking spirals. The Portuguese keep returning with new governors, who all seem to want the same things: land, tribute, control.
You keep countering with the same offerings: peace, partnership, and trade, so long as your people stay free and your rule unchallenged. Occasionally, you let a missionary baptize a local noble, just to keep appearances up. One Jesuit writes
in his diary that Queen Nzinga tolerates the cross, but only because she enjoys watching us carry it. You smile when someone reads that to you. Not wrong, but beneath the diplomacy, there's always the looming threat: betrayal. You remember the time your sister was captured and ransomed back.
She never spoke of what happened during her captivity, and you never asked. But after that, she
never wore shoes again. Said the earth had to feel her now to know she survived. Then there's the moment you intercept a letter, one from a Portuguese commander to your nephew. The wording is vague, but the implications aren't.
Promises of land, a future arrangement. Your nephew swears innocence.
Cries even.
But you've seen that cry before. You used it yourself once, when you were young and outmaneuvered. So you test him. You send him on a mission. Carry a message to a distant allied chief, ensure it arrives safely, and return with an answer.
A simple task on the surface, but the route is treacherous, the politics tricky, and the message encoded with something only the loyal would understand. He passes.
Barely, you give him a smile. Not full approval, just enough warmth to remind him you're watching. Later, your spies confirm what you suspected. Someone else forged the original letter. A clumsy attempt to sow distrust.
You wonder briefly if you were too harsh, but the moment passes.
You've survived this long by trusting your instincts, and they still whisper. Never let your crown rest on sentiment. One afternoon, you sit with an elder advisor.
He pours palm wine into a wooden cup and murmurs, "You know, my queen, the Portuguese no longer know how to describe you.
They once
Called you rebel, then ally, then queen. Now, they mostly just call you
Nzinga. You raise your eyebrows. Sounds accurate, and it is.
because by now, you've become something larger than titles.
Larger than bloodlines.
You are your own institution.
Your court is mobile. Your army loyal. Your name feared and respected even in Lisbon's royal court. But you haven't forgotten where you started, some nights.
When the moon is soft and the jungle alive with crickets, you sit by the fire and listen to old songs, the ones your mother used to hum while grinding millet.
A younger attendant might ask what they mean, and you smile, pretending you don't.
Remember, you do.
Every word. Those songs tell stories of queens who rose from nothing, kings who died young, and empires that faded into dust because they forgot how to listen. You never forget.
You always listen. Even now, when the winds shift and your bones creak, you remain attuned to rumor, to rhythm, to family, even to betrayal. Because one lesson you learned long ago, in the shadow of that crocodile rug. Power isn't about winning battles. It's about knowing who might light the match before they even strike it.
Your hands ache more than they used to.
Not from battle, those days are mostly behind you, but from writing, draft after draft of treaties, letters to governors, careful instructions to your generals, and ever so polite threats hidden beneath layers of formal prose. Age hasn't slowed your mind, but your fingers complain bitterly, especially on cold mornings. You sit on a velvet-cushioned stool beneath a white silk awning. Around you, the capital you rebuilt hums with quiet authority. It's no longer the jungle, camp of earlier years, with muddy paths and makeshift tents.
Now, your court is in Matamba, solid, planted, and stubborn just like you. Matamba's streets bustle with traders, guards in bright cloth sashes, and gossiping courtiers.
You've arranged things precisely. Markets on the outer ring, homes for nobles closer in, your royal compound at the center, guarded by men who never sleep and women who fight better than most of them. Leopard skin cloaks sway in the breeze. A drummer taps a rhythm nearby steady, like your heartbeat used to be. You've turned this place into a fortress.
Not of stone, but of ritual, reputation, and clever architecture.
Your throne room, for instance, is built with just enough echo
that even whispers sound serious. A deliberate choice. You like keeping people on edge. This is your final court.
You know that. You've settled here not because you're tired of moving, but because you've finally made this land yours in more than name. Yet the battles never quite stopped. Just last week, a Portuguese commander suggested oh so innocently that a new peace treaty might include tribute. You laughed.
Tribute?
From you. You didn't give it when you were hiding in caves, and you certainly won't now. With velvet under your feet and a waiting room full of envoys, you compose a reply. The next morning,
it's 3 pages of flowing, gracious prose, but your favorite line is the final sentence. The Queen of Matamba regrets that she cannot accommodate your suggestion, as she has already given enough to history. The letter is hand-delivered by a messenger in ceremonial paint. You hear the Portuguese governor nearly chokes on his wine reading it. Still, you are not reckless. You continue to train your guards, meet with military leaders, and revise defense maps with a fine comb. If they come again, and they might, you'll be ready. Not with brute strength, but with ambushes, broken bridges, and decoys dressed like you in the throne room. Historians still debate whether you ever intended to launch another major war in your final years, or if you simply kept up the appearance of readiness as a kind of elegant bluff.
Either way, it worked. Your court becomes something rare in this era. A black-led kingdom not only surviving but diplomatically respected by both African and European powers.
They don't love you, but they no longer ignore you.
Some even fear you enough to pretend affection. And what of your people?
They begin to reroute.
Families plant cassava and groundnuts again. Towns expand, and you personally commission new wells.
You visit one village where a well bears your name, etched in wood above the stones. The children chant songs in your honor.
You pretend not to cry. You fail. You even return to Christianity, sort of. It's a political gesture, as always.
You allow a priest to baptize you again, maybe the 4th time now. You've lost count.
This time, the name they give you is Ana de Souza. You nod politely. Nzinga still fits better. The Portuguese record this moment in glowing tones,
as though it erases the decades of war and betrayal.
You let them believe what they need to.
Meanwhile, your army quietly receives new supplies, and your spy network remains in full swing.
Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Then there's your body. You feel it winding down. A pain in your knee you used to ignore now flares if you sit too long. Your eyes grow tired faster when reading fine print.
You find yourself telling the same story twice to the same advisor, but with better dramatic
timing. The second time, you start giving away things, not out of despair, but order.
Your swords to the general who once carried you on his back through a flooded river.
Your rings to a young courtier who makes you laugh like your sister used to. Your journals heavily encrypted. Of course, go into a locked chest only your
most trusted aide can open. There is no grand announcement of retirement. You are queen until your last breath.
But the signs are there. One morning, you ask for help rising from your bed. The servants pause, unsure. You've never needed help before. You nod once, and they understand.
They never speak of it. You begin speaking to your ancestors more often now, not aloud, but in your thoughts.
You ask them if you were right to fight so long,
to pretend to convert,
to bluff and bend and burn and rebuild. They don't answer, of course, but the wind through the grass outside your chamber sounds vaguely approving. Your last audience is a quiet one.
A diplomat from Brazil, of all places.
He offers trade and respect. You offer a parable about a hawk and a goat that nobody quite understands. He bows anyway. When he leaves, you stare out at your courtier creation.
You imagine it a century.
From now to centuries. Will they remember your speeches, your campaigns?
Or will it all come down to one line in a dusty book? Nzinga, Queen of Indigo and Matamba, ruled fiercely and wisely during the time of empire and upheaval. You hope not. You hope they remember that you laughed too.
That you sang. That you outwitted men who thought your throne was a favor and not a fact. You lie back on cushions dyed deep indigo, the royal color.
You close your eyes. Somewhere outside, someone
plays the flute. The tune is new, the feeling familiar. You are old now,
but you are still Nzinga.
You don't remember falling asleep, but you wake to the sound of whispers, real ones, not the political kind. Footsteps pad softly through the royal compound.
A bowl of warm water waits beside your bed, along with a palm leaf fan. Still gently, swaying from the breeze, you sit up slower now.
No dramatic speeches today.
No envoys waiting.
Just the quiet dignity of old age and the peculiar knowledge that, soon, your story will no longer belong to you. The end doesn't come with swords or poison or dramatic betrayal.
It's much subtler. Your body simply begins to slow.
You find yourself too tired to eat a full meal. You spend longer watching the wind in the papaya trees, thinking not of war but of mangoes, of long ago laughter, of sisters and rivals who are now dust. You receive a final visit from your adopted heir, your nephew. He kneels, his head lowered in respect, though you suspect he also snuck a peek to see if your eyes are still sharp. They are, barely. You speak plainly.
No riddles, no metaphors. You urge him to protect the kingdom, to remain unpredictable,
to speak softly but keep a blade near the throne. He promises.
You don't believe all of it, but that's politics. Historians still argue whether he was loyal to the end or quietly laid the groundwork for Portuguese encroachment later.
Some claim he tried to honor your legacy. Others suggest he traded it for a quieter life.
The truth, as always, is tangled in letters and rumors. You take your final audience at dusk. It's a small gathering advisors, guards, a few friends who've somehow survived alongside you.
You offer them thanks, a few dry jokes, and one parting instruction. When I go, let the morning be loud, but only for 3 days.
After that, you dance, and then, without ceremony, you stop appearing in court. No one dares call it your death not yet.
The palace grows hushed.
Distant cousins arrive with anxious eyes.
Priests offer prayers. Musicians tune instruments they
hope not to play at a funeral when you finally slip away quietly. Without fanfare, some say the sky turns slightly orange at midnight. Others swear they heard drums in the hills. Most likely, it was just wind and grief playing tricks.
But still, the story spreads. Your body is wrapped in cloth dyed with rare indigo and ochre, placed in a carved wooden casket, and set in a tomb surrounded by royal guards.
No European emissary is allowed within sight of the burial. You wouldn't have wanted them there, and yet.
Your death does not bring peace. Portuguese officials immediately begin drafting letters, claiming victory by longevity. Some scribble awkward eulogies, calling you formidable or an exotic foe. A few even call you friend, but their records read like bad fan fiction, half invented, suspiciously flattering, and full of misquotes. You would have laughed.
Meanwhile, your own people preserve stories in a way no parchment ever could. Through dance, through fireside whisperings, through lullabies sung by mothers who were once children in your time. In Angola, some carve your image into doorframes. In Brazil, enslaved people whisper your name as a defiant prayer.
In Lisbon, officials erase more than they record, but your legacy doesn't eat their ink. Generations after your death, young girls in Luanda still pretend to be Nzinga balancing baskets on their heads like crowns, giving royal orders to chickens and goats.
Old warriors tell stories of your raids, your disguises, your iron will.
Some tales are true, some stretched, all treasured and far away in dusty university halls. Scholars dig through letters, retranslate documents, and argue about your motivations.
One paper claims you were a brilliant manipulator. Another calls you a proto-feminist. A third insists you were simply trying to survive with style. They're all partly right, but none of them really capture what it meant to be Nzinga.
Not the feel of wet jungle grass under bare feet during a midnight raid. Not the sting of betrayal in a royal court. Not the joy of outwitting a European diplomat with nothing but a wooden stool and a green. You become more than memory. You become symbol, a rebel queen,
a sly negotiator, a warrior in velvet slippers, and yet also simply a woman who once woke at dawn, squinted at the sunlight through mosquito nets, and wondered what kind of letter she'd have to write that day to keep
her kingdom alive.
So here you are gone, but never really gone.
Your name still breathes through the branches of Angola's baobab trees.
Your face still smiles, sometimes stern, sometimes mischievous, from murals painted on cracked concrete walls. You've become folklore and fact in equal measure, and beyond Angola.
You travel even farther now than you did in life. In Brazil, maroon communities, those brave enclaves of escaped enslaved people, chant your story in rhythm with drums made from old barrels.
They call on your courage, imagining you striding through sugarcane fields with a spear in one hand and a treaty in the other. In Haiti, your name is whispered alongside other fierce ancestors.
In the United States, you're buried in textbooks, footnotes, and sometimes awkward multiple-choice questions.
But occasionally, someone gets curious. Someone turns the page and says,
"Wait, who was Queen Nzinga?"
And that's how it starts. Museums
put up plaques with your name, finally getting the spelling right.
Documentaries include your portrait, carefully aged and reimagined.
African historians push back against centuries of European erasure and say, "Let's tell this one properly." They talk about how you ruled for nearly 40 years through invasions, betrayals, economic ruin, and religious whiplash.
How you fought in armor when necessary, but also with words, symbols, ceremony.
How you created a kind of statecraft, all your own, blending tradition with innovation, diplomacy with theatre, and the theatre, historians still argue whether. Your legendary stool incident with the Portuguese governor, where you refused to sit on the floor like a vassal and had a servant kneel as a makeshift throne, really happened.
But that's the point, isn't it?
Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but it should have, because it captures the essence of you. A queen who refused to accept the position others gave her. If the world didn't offer you a throne, you made one. And you didn't just rule your kingdom. You styled it, you named it, you narrated it. Even your enemies, grudgingly, had to write about you. And the longer your memory stretched, the harder it became for them to twist it.
Your legend calcified not in gold, but in grit. Not in palaces, but in persistence. You were always aware of the power of stories.
You knew people remember images, not footnotes.
So you gave them images of the queen astride a horse, draped in leopard skin.
Of the queen laughing at a bishop's awkward blessing.
Of the queen staring down a cannon with nothing but her posture. And while you never declared yourself immortal, you understood what would keep you alive. A name spoken often enough becomes a spell. But of course, there are still debates. Some say you collaborated too much. Others say you should have surrendered less.
Some scholars accuse you of power hoarding.
Others of pragmatism in hard times.
You've been called a savior, a tyrant, a genius, a fake. Let them debate. You're used to people arguing over your life while knowing nothing of its weight. Let them write articles and wave printouts on podcasts. Let them dig through every treaty you signed and every warrior you spared. Let them wonder how you slept at night, knowing your people were still hunted across oceans. They forget that you never really slept. You lived in a time where rest was
a luxury, and survival was a kind of art.
You didn't get to be perfect. You got to be real. Real, like hunger. Real, like a kingdom slipping through your fingers while you smiled at a European envoy and said, "Would you care for some tea?" Real, like walking barefoot after battle, wiping sweat from your brow and thinking, "Not bad. Not bad at all." And when your descendants, be they blood or belief, light candles in your name or name their daughters after you, it's not to honor perfection.
It's to honor fire.
Strategy.
Willpower. You are not a statue.
You are not a myth with no sharp edges. You are Nzinga,
And you lived louder, longer, and cleverer than they ever expected you to.
By now, you've left behind more than a memory. You've left behind a shape. Your life becomes a mold that others reach for, trying it on to see how it fits. Activists reference you. Leaders quote you.
Students write essays that begin with something like, Queen Nzinga was one of Africa's most remarkable women,
As if the continent only got a few.
but you wouldn't care about phrasing.
You'd care about action.
About persistence. In modern Luanda, there's a towering
Statue of you. It stands in the center of a roundabout, arms folded, gaze direct. The horse is majestic.
the posture defiant. Tourists take selfies. Children point. But you'd likely roll your eyes just a little. A bronze likeness? Nice. But how about making sure the girls in rural villages get the education you never did?
That's the kind of tribute you'd actually care about. Historians.
Still argue whether the statue is fully accurate. Was the armor too European?
Did you really ride horses like that? But again, the facts miss the point.
The statue is not about metal.
It's about presence, and you are present. In political speeches, in protests, in bedtime stories that start with, "There once was a queen who refused to kneel." Teachers in Angola name entire syllabi after you.
Feminist scholars argue that you predated intersectionality by centuries. Others say you weren't feminist at all, just strategic.
But labels never interested you. Survival did. Sovereignty did. Winning did. And your victories echo long after your bones return to dust. Some of your royal bloodline still lives in Angola, now woven into a nation that grew from the ashes of kingdoms like yours. The Portuguese eventually lost control after centuries of upheaval, and though they ruled long after your death, they never quite tamed the idea of you. Even now, your image confounds simple analysis.
You weren't a rebel in the way they expected. You negotiated when they thought you'd
Attack. You attacked when they thought you'd pray. You prayed in public, but made alliances in private. IT wasn't chaos, it was choreography. You turned the colonial gaze back on itself, using Catholic rites when they were useful, rejecting them when they weren't. Hosting Christian masses, then quietly offering libations to ancestral spirits afterward.
marrying diplomacy to ritual, marrying wives to establish control.
Refusing to marry for alliance, crafting identity like a shield. You and Nzinga understood branding centuries before marketing departments were invented, and you weren't afraid to be feared. There's an old proverb from the Congo region that goes something like, "The leopard does not ask to be loved." You didn't either, but you were loved by the people who saw you defy empires.
By the women who watched you rule when others said women couldn't.
By the captains who followed your orders across muddy rivers and dense jungle. By the children
Who peeked into court and saw, not a queen behind a veil, but a woman seated on a living throne, demanding respect in her own language. And so, your story lives on. Not in silence, but in song. Not on dusty scrolls, but in the quiet pride of a young girl sitting a little taller after hearing your name.
in a new queen somewhere, facing impossible odds and thinking. Nzinga would have handled this with flair. You taught the world that resistance is not always a roar. Sometimes it's a negotiation, a clever delay, a sudden surrender that is not
Defeat but disguise. You taught us that history doesn't have to be loud to be unforgettable. And now, dear Queen, the time comes to rest. In no battles to plan.
no treaties to draft, just the soft hum of night, the distant chirp of crickets, and the knowledge that your legacy has already outlived every crown and every colonizer. It always will. And now, as we leave Nzinga's world behind, let your breath slow.
Let your body sink just a bit deeper into whatever comforts hold you tonight: pillows, blankets, the gentle creak of the ceiling fan overhead. Imagine the Angolan moon full and quiet, washing silver light over the hills once guarded by her.
Watchful eyes. The jungle hushes. The drums have faded.
No more envoys knocking at midnight. No more horses pawing at the dirt in preparation for war. Only stillness. You've walked alongside a queen tonight through palaces and jungles, councils, and battlefields.
You've seen the strength it takes to rule, not just with force, but with wit.
And now, let that strength soften into calm. Nzinga's story doesn't end in violence or despair, but in legacy.
In pride. In a slow, deliberate exhale. So let her.
Courage wrap around you like a soft blanket. Let her cleverness linger in your thoughts like the aftertaste of strong tea. Let her quiet triumph lull you into dreams. Whatever battles you face today, large or small, know that even queens
Rest. Tonight you are safe. Tonight you are honored. And tonight you sleep.